Well, good evening and welcome to this live stream event on the 21st of June 2022. Martin North from Digital Finance Analyst here. Great to have you on the show tonight. And very important conversation this evening, economically based, but we're going to go range far and wide, I think, as we look at the various things that are going on. Just before I bring Leith in, let me just remind you that we don't provide specific legal or financial advice on the channel. It's general conversation only. We do moderate the chat, so just bear that in mind. This is at the 21st of June 2022 if you're watching on replay, and use @WalkTheWorld if you want to get my attention, ask a question. I do encourage you to continue using the chat and talk to each other, but if you want to throw a question our way, then use @WalkTheWorld. I've also enabled Super Chat as normal, which means that you can get your question top of the list, or indeed, if you'd like to make a contribution to what we do here, that would be greatly appreciated. Anyway, with that out of the way, let me bring Leith in. Leith, hello.
G'day, Martin. Hello, everybody. Great to be on again.
It's super to have you back on, and it was just over a month when you were on last, and things have gone very quick. We're in super economic time at the moment, right? Things are moving so quick.
Yeah, look, it's definitely been fun. I was talking to Martin pre-show that last year was actually pretty boring on MacroBusiness because obviously we're in the grips of the pandemic. Nothing much was happening. Everyone had switched off because I was sick of reading about COVID and everyone got into their shell. And then 2022, it's just been an absolute barnstormer so far, and never a dull moment at the moment. Something to write about every day. I'm watching the housing market correct in real time, just about. Got my one eye on New Zealand, one eye on Australia, and basically eating the popcorn every day, trying not to get fat. Just watching the events unfold like this.
And it's interesting because in a way you could say New Zealand is just slightly further ahead of us, right? Because they started tightening in November, right? And so effectively we can sort of look over to New Zealand and say, well, that's what's going to probably happen here, just a few weeks later.
Yeah, yes and no. New Zealand's obviously, their housing market's already fallen 9% since November. So they started hiking in October. So they started at 0.25 in August. It was their pandemic low cash rate, and they're now at 2%. They started in October. But the difference between New Zealand and Australia is New Zealand, the overwhelming majority of mortgage holders in New Zealand are on fixed rates, typically less than 2 years, so 1 to 2 year fixed rates. In Australia, obviously, most borrowers are on variable rates. So although New Zealand started earlier, about 6 months ahead of us, their monetary policy transmission is not as quick as ours because, the majority of the borrowers that borrowed during the pandemic still aren't being affected by the rise in interest rates because they're on fixed rates. When the rubber's going to really hit the road will be towards the end of this year when that first of those, short-term fixed rates rolls off. Yep. And these poor sods are going to go from, sub 2.5% mortgages to 5 to 6, maybe 7%, depending on how aggressive the RBNZ is. So yes, they're ahead of us, but it's not going to happen as quick there. Whereas here, the overwhelming majority of borrowers are on variable rates, so they're already being whacked by the 0.75% of RBA tightening that's happened over the past 2 months. So it's definitely fun watching both markets, and of course we've got the same banking systems in both nations. The big four Australian banks, the big four New Zealand banks. So it's fun. I pretty much write New Zealand article every day, Australian one every day. New Zealand, Australia, New Zealand, Australia. It's just fun, good fun.
And I actually think that I get good reaction to the New Zealand coverage that I do because there isn't a lot of deep coverage elsewhere around the New Zealand market, and unfortunately. So I'm happy to contribute to some of the debate that's going on there. But I suppose we should touch a little bit on Mr. Lowe today, right? Because there was his outing today, right? Basically making this speech. And there's a few observations I had. The first one was that, he'd been talking about the $250 billion of buffers. Well, he's now downgraded it to 200 billion. So we've spent 50 billion in a week.
Yeah.
Which is quite interesting, right?
What's 50 billion between mates?
Well,
it's it's chump change.
And he also sort of said, rates are probably going to have to go higher, and inflation is a real issue. But he also made an interesting observation that the markets actually are better predictors of where rates are going than he's been, which I thought was quite an interesting admission.
Well, if that's the case, we truly are stuffed. Because I mean, I don't know if we're going to talk about it, but we are going to talk about it. The interest rate forecasts from the financial markets are truly apocalyptic stuff. So if that's true, that the markets are better forecasters than the RBA, well, then we're in deep doggy-doo. That's all I can say.
And Jason's put up a comment saying class action against the RBA for misleading statement rates won't rise until 2024. And of course, last week, Leigh was on 7:30 report, and he sort of weaselly word said, well, assuming that our assumption about the economy was correct, that's what would happen, but our assumptions weren't correct, which I thought was a really interesting reverse course.
Yeah, well, it was actually good to say. I put an article up today at about lunchtime. So you've got if anyone's on macrobusiness.com.au, you've got the newsletters. It should be number one article there. It was basically a whole bunch of economists that come out and bagged the RBA today for misleading on wage growth. So listeners, your listeners will know this, but just for background, for about 18 months, the RBA was saying that they're not going to hike interest rates until they have bona fide evidence of wage increases, and that wages have to grow by about 3% annually before they'll hike rates. And that was sort of their underpin between high not raising rates until 2024. And the reason why they were taking that stance was because basically Australia's inflation, and indeed globally in a lot of countries, is imported inflation through petrol prices, etc., and as well as extreme weather conditions. And the RBA wanted to basically make sure that the inflation was sustainable and it was being domestically driven. And the main way that you get domestically driven inflation is obviously through wage growth. So the RBA was looking for that trigger. Now, when that trigger didn't arrive, they then decided to jig the stats, and they changed their definition of wage growth to then rely on the same liaison, which they relied on for the last decade, which always said that wages were going to rise when they in fact fell. So the whole thing's a farce. The RBA is basically just making up as they go. And they've been truly that's the chart there. So all those little upticks, those forecasts that we saw from 2014 through to pretty much now, have all been based on the liaison that the RBA does, and every time it's wrong. And then about 18 months ago, the RBA said, we're not going to use expectations anymore. We're now going to use bona fide data. We're going to see the evidence before we lift rates. But then, of course, they were holding that position up until about March. And then they decided to start backtracking in April. Then in May, of course, they jacked rates without evidence. And the evidence that's come out since they started jacking rates has actually gone against them. So we had the wage price index came out, 2.35%. So it's recovered to the pre-pandemic level, but it's still very low. And then, of course, the national accounts, it was even more damning. So the March quarter national accounts came out a couple of weeks back, and that showed that Australia's unit labour costs. Now, this is my number one measure for wage pressures these days. So real unit labour costs basically measures wage costs of businesses once you factor in labour productivity. And it turns out that unit labour cost has actually fallen 6.5% since the pandemic began, and it's almost the lowest in Australia's history. So what that tells you is that wage pressures aren't driving Australia's inflation. In fact, wages are disinflationary. Yet the RBA has gone ahead and raised rates based on business liaison. So anyway, look, they just make it up as they go. And I made the mistake a couple of months back saying, the RBA is probably not going to raise rates until towards the end of the year because they're going to have to wait to see the wage growth. That was based purely on what the RBA had been saying for 18 months. So I took them at the word. And then obviously they did a 180 in a month, and now they're talking incredibly bullish about jacking up rates really quickly, probably going to get 0.5% next month, and who knows thereafter. So, yeah, look, it's a perfect time for an RBA, for a review into the RBA, and I think they need to be taken to task, taken to the woolshed, really.
Well, look, there is going to be a review of the RBA, and Jim Chalmers has said it's going to be a more independent review, because originally the RBA and Treasury was going to review themselves, right? Which would have been, great idea, right?
Well, yeah. Hey, why don't I get Philip Morris to review cigarette legislation or something? I mean, come on, this is ridiculous.
Yeah. And of course, it's worth just underscoring to people that on the board of the RBA is the head of the Treasury, right? All right.
Yep, Dr. Stephen Kenny. I worked under him, actually, the Australian Treasury.
Yep. And, of course, the RBA, the Treasury APRA and ASIC all sit around the table in the Council of Financial Regulators, right? So I guess the interesting question is just how independent is the RBA, right? Certainly not independent enough to do its own review.
No. But actually, look, I'm not going to give them credit, but they sort of seem to have had a bit of a Damascus moment during the pandemic when they started changing the way they were talking about things. So they started, like, for example, talking about immigration and its impact on wages and all these sort of things they'd never done before. And then they talked about how they want to get full employment and they want to push unemployment down as low as they can get, which then came into this whole inflation argument that they're not going to raise rates until we get, bona fide evidence of wage growth, etc. And all that sounded great, but unfortunately they've caved in the financial markets and basically just gone back to their old ways. So, it's the whole thing's a farce. And I can understand, like, I know people who took out mortgages in the last couple of years who were pretty furious, to be quite frank. And look, you can say, oh, suck eggs, you shouldn't have bought whatever, but it was basically, a couple of them were first-time buyers, etc. And they were like, well, I've got kids, I need a house, and RBA's going to keep rates low and prices going up. I need to get in. I mean, I don't really have a choice. And then suddenly, one of them pretty much bought at the peak, and they're I mean, I'm saying they're going to be in trouble, but they're not exactly happy about it. And they were like, well, the RBA was saying this, and now they're doing this. What's going on? Because this individual's not an economist. They just work in a regular job, and they don't, they're not as in the weeds as we are. But that's the perception they had, and I think they're right. You can understand why they'd be pretty angry about it. So, yeah.
Well, and of course, at the same time, Michael Zucker was spruiking the first owner grant and the home builder and saying rates ultra low, great time to buy, et cetera, et cetera. So,
can I just say on home builder, hasn't that been the most disastrous policy in retrospect? I mean, yes. At the time when they bought it out, I thought, why don't they just put it into public housing? That's where the need was.
Yep.
But in retrospect, obviously they didn't see this coming, but home builder is actually going to be a contributor to bringing down the whole construction industry, because it obviously brought forward demand. Builders went in big time, signed all these contracts, etc. Then we had obviously some labour shortages, material shortage, etc., just pushed out the timeframes. And while there's this big backlog of work, all on fixed price contracts, the cost of materials and inputs has surged, and now basically every builder is busier than ever, but losing more money than ever. Correct. Because every house they build they actually lose money on, because the contract price is this and their input costs are going to this. Yep. And it hasn't been caused by a home builder, but it's been exacerbated by a home builder.
Absolutely.
And so this whole thing was designed around stimulating the construction industry, when in fact it's going to contribute to sending builders bust.
Yep. It's a profitless boom, isn't it?
Completely profitless boom. Diabolical policy, really. I mean, obviously, the government wouldn't have seen this coming, but when you think about it, they've hosed billions of dollars of taxpayers' money for a policy that's in effect going to send builders bust.
Yep.
And leave a whole bunch of home buyers pretty angry, because they're going to be left with half-finished homes and lost deposits and all that sort of thing. So it's just another Morrison government blunder to add to a long list.
Well, yes, there have been so many attempts to sort of keep the the property bubble going along, but unfortunately, people have been trapped now into buying at the bottom of the market when rates were ultra low, and now they're going up, so they're being caught. Many people have got these fixed price contracts that will probably never be completed, or if not for many months or years, so there's extra costs involved. And of course, some builders tried to then renegotiate those contracts, and then those were turned over, for example, in Queensland. So it's a mess. And we're seeing tens of builders falling over on a regular basis now, small ones and medium-sized ones, right? So this not Mirvac, Meriton. Not Meriton. What's the one? Metricon. Yep.
Yeah. Metricon's like one of our biggest home builders. Yeah. And that's basically going cap in hand with Victorian and New South Wales governments, because they're almost too big to fail. Yep. And so in the end, it's going to be taxpayers who carry the can, are going to get flogged, and individuals. Well, talking about taxpayers carrying the can, it's just worth reflecting briefly on the term funding facility, right? The term funding facility, $188 billion, very cheap money, was thrown by the RBA at the banks, right?
Now, the banks have put all that money plus a bit more into the exchange settlement accounts at the RBA, right? Guess how much they're earning on those at the moment? 0.75.
The cash rate, isn't it?
0.75%.
Yeah, cash rate, yeah.
Right. So basically, that means that $1.8 billion roughly on the current numbers is now money going directly to the banks. don't we feel good about ourselves in terms of...
And then, of course, the TFF also pushed down fixed rates.
Yes.
And then and those people took out the 2% mortgages, the 2.5% mortgages, all that sort of thing. And then now those poor sods are going to have to refinance it. God knows what. So, it's all set up nicely, isn't it? And I tell you what, it's not just we're talking about New Zealand before, but the interesting thing is I think the situation there, the housing situation, the RBNZ's actions, et cetera, are going to bring down the Jacinda Ardern government. Yeah. Like, I honestly think it's going to take down the government. This is how big it is. They built this ginormous bubble. Like New Zealand's household debt's not quite as bad as ours, but their housing market is even more overvalued than ours. Like, it makes ours look, I wouldn't say cheap, but it's, it'd be, if New Zealand was a housing market, it'd be like Sydney versus Melbourne. Like, Melbourne's ridiculous, but Sydney's even worse. So think of it like that. And basically, New Zealand consumer confidence is collapsed. The Jacinda Ardern government went from being one of the most popular governments in history about a year ago to suddenly being trailing the opposition by about 10 points, 10%. And she's gone from being their saviour to an absolute pariah. And a lot of it's because of these inflationary pressures, the mortgage rates going up, house prices falling. Kiwis are miserable, and I think they're going to take it out of the ballot box. Like she's due for an election about September next year, I think. It could be November actually, but late-ish next year. And by that stage, the RBNZ tips that New Zealand's cash rate is going to be nearly 4%, which is double what it is now. So they'll be staring at 6 to 7% mortgages by then. Probably the housing market's probably down 20% plus. You're going to have a lot of people in negative equity and struggling, paying $1,000 extra a month on their mortgages, etc. And they're going to boot the government out. It's as simple as that. So I think, if there's one person that can be pretty angry about this whole situation, it's probably Jacinda Ardern. And, and the Labor Party here, if they don't get on top of it, especially the energy crisis, who knows? Like, they're obviously new government, new splash of paint. They can always blame the previous mob, but that'll only get them so far. And a year or two in, if this thing drags on, well then, we'll start taking the pitchforks out on there.
Yeah, let's just reflect on this interest rates question just for a bit longer. And Jason put this one up just a second ago. Like I said, that rates will be low, and I think he was basically saying that's because the recession we got to have. But what would happen if it went to 15%, right? What happened if we did that? Now, the question is, how high are rates going to go, right? Now, I know that you've got a very specific point of view that says it's impossible for rates to go as high as the market is betting, right? And in fact,
yeah, well, actually, do you want to put that chart up?
Yeah, we'll do now.
Is that cool? Yeah, so I did this slide today. This is the only slide I've done for this. So Martin's got a couple, I think, but I didn't want to bore everyone with the whole chart pack. But basically, the chart on the left comes from the futures market, and it's from the ASX. I pulled this one up this afternoon. And this basically gives you the latest cash rate forecast for Australia. And currently, we're obviously at 0.85. And the futures market is tipping that by December, Australia's cash rate is going to be 3.7%. So that's, that's almost 3% higher than it is currently by December. So that's 6 months' time. And I said May, but by April next year, it's going to be basically 4.2%, and 4.25% by May next year. So if you were simply to add those cash rate changes to the discount variable mortgage rate that the RBA publishes, which is the chart on the right, I'll put the official cash rate in blue, the discount variable mortgage rate. So that's basically the average discount variable mortgage rate that the RBA tracks. And if you simply add those and assume that they get passed on fully to mortgage holders, and it could be a little bit more, a little bit less, but broadly that's what you're going to get. We're staring at a variable mortgage rate of about 7.7%. by May next year. And that'll be more than double the pandemic low, which was 3.45% only 2 months ago. So, that's a doubling of mortgage rates in about a year or 13 months from the low. And I don't know about you, I don't know how many households in Australia could cope with a doubling of their mortgage rate without taking any, without grazing their elbow. And if you actually plug that into a mortgage calculator, so you grab a median house price and whatever, and put the current rate, and then add that to it, it's roughly a 50% increase in monthly mortgage repayments on a principal interest loan. If you're interest only, it's going to be basically 1 for 1, like double. So, regardless, you're looking at massive, massive increases in monthly mortgage repayments. And, for someone who's especially borrowed in Sydney, who's with a median house price is, I don't know, $1.5 million or something, and you're a recent buyer there and you just bought the median house price, you're looking at, $1,500 a month or $2,000 or whatever it is. It's going to be some gigantic amount of extra, monthly mortgage repayment. And this obviously has implications for the Australian economy, because household consumption is by far our biggest driver. It accounts for about 55% of growth, final demand, which is like the domestic growth, you take out exports on a quarterly basis. So basically where household consumption goes, the economy usually follows. And if you're going to have households paying $500 to $1,000 a month on average more on their mortgages, that's money they can't spend in the economy. And so it's going to smash household consumption. They're going to cut back on everything. Gym memberships, cafes, all going to the movies, all their consumption spending is going to tank. And it's going to be, centered around essentials. And you're going to have a huge economic shocks. And then obviously, if rates go up that fast, you're in a big house price correction. So the Reserve Bank of Australia's own modelling suggests that for every 200 basis point rise, that's 2% rise in the mortgage rate, house prices fall by 15% in real terms. So that means in nominal terms, probably more like 20% in the current situation. So if the market's right, you're looking at 30% plus price falls based on the RBA's own modelling. So if you get house prices falling, well, that's also going to compound the hit on consumption, because households will feel poorer and they'll spend less there. So, I honestly think if the market's right, we've got a deep recession coming, and it's going to be deep and nasty, based on just household consumption alone, let alone everything else, let alone home building and all the other things that feed into growth. If you just look at it through the eyes of the consumer, which again is, more than half of the nation's growth, you're looking at dark times ahead for the Australian economy, and particularly, especially hard. It's always hardest on the recent buyers. So, someone like me who bought this house 10 years ago and has a pretty small mortgage on it these days, I'll be fine. But if I was 10 years younger and I just bought this house, 10 years younger and I just bought this house at current market, which is way higher than I paid 10 years ago, well, then, you're going to be in trouble. And that's the thing where, the RBA can point to the $200 billion worth of savings buffers and that, but bet your bottom dollar, it's not the people who bought recently who've got those savings buffers. It'll be, people like me or whatever who are already established and weren't the ones at risk anyway. It's always the marginal borrower which causes the pain and who gets smashed the hardest. So, I think the Reserve Bank and others who are just brushing this off like, households can handle it, are sort of delude themselves a bit. If we think that the cratering of mortgage rates and the stimulus is what drove this generational house price boom we've had over the past couple of years, well, obviously, if you reverse those factors and you jack up mortgage rates and you effectively cut stimulus, which is what we're getting through, higher petrol prices and energy costs and all this other stuff, which is basically unstimulus, well, then you're going to have the opposite impact on the housing market. It's a symmetrical bet. So, anyone who sort of thinks we can just get through this unscathed without the housing market falling sharply and, minimal effects in the economy, I don't see how that can happen when it's pretty much the reverse of what drove the economy, what drove the housing market up last time. It's just a mirror image.
Yeah, it is, absolutely. Well, it's very interesting that their earlier modelling, when they were looking at prices going up, this is the tulip modelling, said 1% equals 30% rise in prices, right? So that's right. And suddenly
they've changed the model. But even then it's scary. Even then it's really scary.
Exactly.
So,
And I suppose then the question is, how high do you think rates, the cash rate will go? Because at some point they're going to start seeing these cracks emerging. But I'd also make the point that it's going very quickly, right? So they've almost, lift this month, maybe lift next month. They won't see the results of that coming through in the sort of the rearview mirror for a number of months afterwards. So the chances of them actually, being cautious enough to see what happens, compared with just lifting the rates, especially because I have this theory that what they're really doing is looking at what the Fed's doing and pretty much aping what the Fed's doing, right?
Yeah. Well, it almost looks like they're just copying whatever the financial markets are doing. Yeah. So, they're saying, I think Phil Lowe said, as you said earlier, Phil Lowe said, the markets are better at predicting. Is that because you're just following the markets? Like, it's just, it's a bit stupid. But I mean, back to your question, I think if I don't think the RBA should go above 1% cash rate, but that doesn't mean they won't. I think they definitely will, because we're already at 0.75, and I think the next month they'll go, 0.5%. Some people are calling for 0.75 or a shock and awe one. Like, I think Robert Goodleaves in the Australian was saying, need to go 1%. I mean, crazy. I think we're going to have it could end up playing out like you've said, in that they go so fast they don't see the result of it and end up just going, way too aggressive. And that's pretty much what they did in the financial crisis. So people who track this stuff, or if you had a mortgage at the time, you might remember it. When the financial crisis hit, the RBA actually raised rates by about 1% over a series of months. So they kept raising into it. And then when the housing market started to fall and the economy started to teeter, they then slashed rates by 4% over 6 months. So they realised the error of their ways, and then they cut hard. I wouldn't be surprised if we have not the same magnitude, but I wouldn't be surprised if we have the RBA go too hard on the upside and then have to cut a little bit to try and correct itself. This time next year, I wouldn't be surprised. But I just hope they haven't already gone, they haven't followed the market and they've gone to 3% plus cash rate. Like, that'd be suicidal. I think if they did that, they'd have to cut pretty hard. But in answering your question, I got no idea, because you can think what they should do, and then you think what they will do, and I don't know what they will do, because they've been pretty foolhardy. And the rhetoric coming out of them is, Phil Lowe was a couple of weeks back was saying 2.5% seems likely. Yeah. Sort of, and use some BS logic like, that's the midpoint between our inflation target, so they should be at 2.5%. Yes. And that way you got a real interest rate of 0 or something. Maybe they'll go there, maybe they'll go higher. I think both's too much, but we'll have to wait and see. But I think if they do that, they're going to come to the realisation that the housing market's absolutely coming off hard. Consumption spending's collapsed and the economy's in trouble, and they'll be and unemployment will then start to rise with a lag, and then they'll probably have to be forced to cut. So they might have to, go from, 2.5% down to 1% anyway. Gareth Ed at CBA seems to think the neutral cash rate's about 1.25, I think he said, which sounds about right. He actually might have said 1%. But, around about that level seems to be the level where they should probably stop at if they want to just cool the economy enough and to give them some ammunition for the next downturn. But it seems obvious they're going to go well above that. And they'll probably do it next month. So fun times, grab the popcorn. I'm certainly kind of enjoying it. Like I do a bit of, what's the German term? Schadenfreude, whatever.
Yeah.
Even though I got a mortgage, and so I cop in the neck like everyone else. But, I just sort of look at this stuff and go, man, these guys are crazy. But part of me, I don't want to see it happen because I think it'll be very destructive. But the other part of me is sort of like, I wonder what will happen if it does do it. So there is this curiosity of it as well, even though I still think it's stupid to go as hard as what the markets and everyone are saying.
And it's just worth reflecting, right? If you look at the very long-term average mortgage interest rate in Australia, it's about 7%.
Yeah, right. It would be. But of course, that includes the time when house prices were very cheap
and very low. And
exactly. Yeah. And obviously we had higher inflation. I mean, we got higher transitory inflation now. But, I mean, the fact that the price to income multiple is so high now means that you obviously can't have interest rates at those average levels. If you did, you got a huge price adjustment coming up.
Yeah, absolutely.
Just the way it is, you have to. I mean, with the household debt levels the way they are, you just can't run the long-term average interest rate because the long-term average debt level is so far below what it is at the moment.
Absolutely. Well, one of the interesting questions is what is inflation at, right? 5.1% is the official number, right? But there was an interesting thing in the local paper in the Illawarra News showing that actually down here for staples, the inflation rate is 20%, 24%, right?
You know what? I'm not surprised. Now, I'll say straight out, I'm a tightwad. So I shop at the Dick Smith's going to hate me.
No.
But I shop at the mob on the left, right? And I've been shopping there since 2003. Yep. I'm a tightwad, and I buy my petrol at the low price of cycle and blah blah blah, and I'm all that sort of stuff. I'm just cheap. I'm a cheap bastard, basically. And I've noticed that. Like the big one that's not on the list is just a slab of butter. So I used to buy my slab of butter at Aldi, $1.20 last year for like a little, one of those 500, whatever the ones that size. And same if you got the cheapo Woolworths, the home brand one. The other day I was shocked. I went in there, $3.50 at Aldi for a little butter.
Yep.
And my full fat Greek yogurt that's gone from $8, $8.50 was it a couple of months ago. Now it's like 10. So I mean, it's not it's not enough for someone like me to worry about, because I'm still going to Aldi and I'm a cheap bastard. But but you do notice it. You look at it and go, whoa, man, that's actually a pretty big price increase. So I'm not surprised at all for that sort of stuff. It's part of it's obviously weather related. We've had extreme weather in Australia, so that's one-off factors. You've obviously got the fuel costs, which is imported. The big problem for Australia coming up, and this is totally self-inflicted wound, is the energy crisis. So, despite being the Saudi Arabia of gas, we're paying European prices, and soon there are predictions that electricity costs are going to double, gas prices are going to double. So here we are, one of the nations, one of the world's richest energy nations, screwing over our own people, paying the world's highest prices and all these things purely because we've got these multinational gas cartels selling 95% foreign owned, flogging off 90% plus of our gas overseas and ripping us off on the East Coast because we don't have domestic gas reservation, while our friends over in the West Coast have got their own gas market with domestic gas reservation. They're totally insulated from world prices. Like, can you imagine the uproar if you were in Saudi Arabia and you went to fill up your car at the pump and you're paying, I don't know, $4 for a litre of petrol like they do in Europe? That's kind of what we're doing with gas. Like, we are the Saudi Arabia of gas, yet we're paying European prices or more. And it's just wrong. And the problem with it is, if these electricity prices ramp up and the gas prices go up as projected, well, then that's just going to feed inflation. It's going to, the RBA will do all this cost push inflation that we've seen with petrol through the economy. It'll send businesses bust. It'll be an absolute nightmare. And then the RBA will be justified in raising rates even higher, even though it can't do anything about that. So that's another one of these, good old Australian own goals we're going to have. And whenever I see the Albanese government get up there and talk about cost of living, I'm like, fix the gas problem, mate. That's all you have to do. Domestic reservation and export controls in coal and gas. Simple. That's all you have to do. Do with it, stroke of a pen.
But it's interesting because they said, well, we've got to be careful of sovereign risk issues, right? Which sort of sounds to me like a very spurious argument.
Oh, mate, it's a joke. And the whole thing is that the sovereign risk is on, companies like Santos, who I'll be honest, I hate Santos with a passion. So Santos, when they're building these export trains in Gladstone, said that they're only going to build one because they didn't have enough gas for 2 export trains. And then they went and built 2, and they didn't have enough gas. So they end up buying gas from the other providers to then export it to fulfill their contracts and rob the domestic market. So look, it's government failure. It's multinationals looking after themselves, making war profits, and because they're multinational, they don't have any loyalty to Australia. And in the end, we're going to be an energy rich nation that's basically shooting ourselves in the foot, paying high energy prices. And Australia's already the lowest manufacturing country in the OECD, and we're just going to kill it even more. We're going to halve it again because obviously energy is a key input, and if your energy costs go up, you can't compete. And for households, it means we're going to have less disposable income to spend on everything else. So we're going to get hit in the neck with obviously the inflation on essentials, and then mortgage repayments are going up, and then we're going to also have pay more for energy as well, which is completely stupid in an energy-rich country which should be insulated from global energy prices. So, Australia for you.
Only Australia could do this.
No. This is one thing. So my poor old business partner, Dave Llewellyn-Smith, has been writing about the gas crisis for 8 years and been ignored for 8 years. And then finally it's the proverbials hit the fan, just as he said it would. And, now he's getting a bit of attention, etc. But it's like this was, he saw this train wreck coming 8 years ago, as soon as they decided to build these bloody export terminals. And the perverse thing is, exports are supposed to make your country richer. But here we have a situation where the more we export, the poorer we get as a nation. Like the multinational companies get richer, but the rest of us get poorer. And we'll be richer tomorrow if we just simply shut those bloody plants down, because guess what? Domestic gas energy prices would collapse and the export revenue goes to the multinationals anyway. And talking about sovereign risk, who are we going to offend? We're going to offend China, who's now our enemy anyway, is perceived as our enemy. So because they're our main buyer. So who cares? Like, it's just the whole thing's a joke. And we know for a fact that other countries laugh at us too. They go, why are you doing this? They wouldn't do this. Like, we're the only gas exporting nation in the world that doesn't reserve, 20% or whatever it is for its own domestic market. Yep. And we just let the free market go. And the free market's just a whole bunch of, a cartel of multinational firms who fleece us. And the government lets it happen. And then you got Chris Bowen and Mad King, Madeline King, the Mad King, defending it. It's a joke.
And WA, of course, has renovation, right? Yep. And
$6 they're paying for their gas.
Correct.
We're paying like 60 or 80.
Yep.
It's just, and their price has been flat. And the whole thing is, if you want a controlled experiment of two different systems, you go to the East Coast, you got the national energy market, which is an absolute failure. And then you got WA with actually pulling out poles and wires, and they've got stable, reliable energy that's cheap. And you look at the two systems and you go, which one would I rather be in? Like, we don't even have to theorize about this, because we've got an example in our own country, a jurisdiction that's on its own doing the right thing. Just copy it. That's all you have to do. It's already been done. Like, you don't have to go, we don't know because this might happen or that might happen. It's like, it's a controlled experiment that's happening in front of our eyes, and it's working over there and it's not working here. Yep. So you copy the model that's working. Yep. It's public policy 101.
You'd think so.
Anyway, it's one thing that makes me angry, and I know it makes Dave even more angry because he writes about it every day. Yeah. I'm just an observer who talks to him about it and gets angry, but he actually has to write about it.
But the point that I want to make here is that if you think about a typical household, right, and a household has a single budget, and out of that budget they have to pay their mortgage or their rent, and they have to pay for the gas, and they have to pay for the petrol at the pump, and they have to pay their food, etc., etc. And you put all that together, right? There's no way that the average householder is seeing 5.1% inflation. No way.
No. I don't think so. I mean, I look at my own situation, and I'm, I guess, fortunate, work from home. I barely drive, so I got drive to boxing. That's about it. That's my, saviour for when I leave work. I go and get punched in the head. Hence the trophies over there. But anyway, so that's the only time I really drive is when I go to the gym and back. So I'm pretty much I fill up once a month and that sort of thing. But even for a cheap bastard like me who shops at Aldi, even I notice it. And I think the cost of all those essentials, etc., is just ridiculous. Then I wouldn't be surprised if the 5.2% inflation is grossly understated, although the ABS's cost of living index, I think, was even less than 5.2%. So I don't know how that's worked out.
Well, it's retrospective, firstly, and secondly, of course, it's weighted on a particular way. And
spot on, Cookie Boy. Sorry, I just read that comment. Second most, like New Zealand, number one. I mean, out of the English-speaking country. So sorry, I interrupted you, mate.
No. It's just
first time I usually don't read the check because I got this massive screen. I used to work on the laptop and it was like this big. Now I've got this. Now I'm in the home office. It's big screen. I can read it.
Oh, very good. Yeah. Well, I sort of try to pick up the ones that I think will help the conversation. Not always successfully, but
and Australia's got to try harder. We're second for housing, at least in the English-speaking countries, and we're second in the world for household debt behind Switzerland. Even though Switzerland's, it's a dark money place, and it's probably it's not the same as here. But we're coming second. We've got to lift our game, really.
Absolutely. And Jason, then thanks for the super chat there. Buy one iceberg lettuce in December 2022 prices for you and Leith. Thanks for your time, guys. Appreciate it. Hit the like button if you appreciate Martin and Leith's time here, peoples. Costs you nothing in an ever-inflating time. So I really appreciate that. Thank you. Absolutely. If you can find an iceberg lettuce at the moment, finding an iceberg lettuce is a real problem, right?
Yeah, the thing is, why would you want one? Like, iceberg's rubbish. Like, honestly, it's like Jamie Oliver had it right when he goes, "This is what you do with iceberg lettuce," and he just poops it. So it is good in Big Macs. Like, it's got that gives that texture.
It's more texture than flavour, isn't it?
Yeah. Or in a paleo hamburger, if you want to leave the bun off, which I actually did that before a boxing fight. I need to cut weight.
Okay.
But I didn't. Yeah, I was a bit of that stuff. But anyway, so I'm loaded up on caffeine. Yeah. To start at about 5 a.m. this morning. So okay. And then my wife goes, "Oh, do you want to make you really strong?" I'm like, "Yeah." And then so I'm a little bit wired right now. So if I'm a little bit loose, I apologise.
No props. Well, let's go on to look at this. This is the Roy Morgan Consumer Confidence, right? Which is actually worth just standing back and thinking about it for a bit. It's basically saying, other than that very sharp dip, brief dip around the COVID when it first hit, our consumer confidence, although it increased 1.6% this last time, is way, 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 way down. Now, that tells me something quite important about the fact that, maybe people are going to actually spend less, because if they're not as confident about what's going on, isn't that a natural outcome?
100%. And that chart there, I did one today where I pulled the same data. But if you actually go into their spreadsheets that they provide with their release on the Roy Morgan website, they give you the data all the way back to late 80s.
Yeah.
So the survey goes back to late 80s. And outside that little tiny dip during the pandemic, we're actually at the lowest consumer confidence since about the early 90s recession. So it's way below the bottom of the GFC. Like this is pretty much, outside that little tiny dip last year, this is the lowest since, I was 13. So it's, really, really low. And it's not just here, it's New Zealand. It's, I think the US is the same. There's
the Michigan one from the US is as low as it's ever been, right? And it's the same in the UK too. So
that's right. And the interesting thing about it is that not in my lifetime anyway, we've never, I wouldn't say never, but it's generations at least. We haven't started a rate hiking cycle with consumer confidence this low. Like usually when they start raising rates, consumer confidence is high. You got inflation's going up because of excess demand, right? It's demand driven usually. This is the complete opposite. We've got confidence absolutely gutted because of these energy concerns and cost of living concerns and that stuff. And the inflation's actually been cost push inflation, which is mostly imported or, weather related with respect to lettuces and that sort of thing. So it's a really unique set of circumstances. And again, it segues beautifully into what we're talking about before, with respect to, household consumption being more than 55% of the economy's growth. And this is just another one of those, massive headwinds, like you said, that's going to weigh on growth. So, it's a very dangerous time to be hiking up, aggressively hiking interest rates.
Yeah.
But look, I'll be straight out. I don't think it was appropriate for the cash rate to stay at 0.1. Like that's given the labour market we've got, et cetera. So we've got no problems with rate increasing it a bit, but it's just more the forecast that we're getting from the financial markets, et cetera. It's just ridiculous.
Well, there is a classic economic argument to say if you want to quash inflation, you actually need an interest rate that's higher than the inflation, right? So even the market is saying we're never going to get to a rate higher than where the inflation rate is at the moment, and Lowe's saying 7% by the end of the year.
Yeah, well, imagine. So but the way I look at it is, you look at what's driving the inflation, and can interest rates control it? I mean, how is increasing everyone's mortgage repayment by $1,000 a month going to temper petrol prices? It's not. It's important. How's it going to temper energy prices when you got this policy failure that we've got in Australia with gas reservation and coal, etc.? It's not. Like that can be solved, but not through interest rates. Like the domestic energy crisis can be solved through policy quite easily, stroke of a pen almost. But interest rates is useless for that. It's useless for alleviating problems with lettuces because you can't stop the rain. I mean, interest rates can't go back in time and stop the floods we just had. It's the only way you can get inflation down in that situation is if you want to cause a recession and you smash demand so much that side of the inflation. So you get deflation on that side, which offsets the inflation on the other side. And if you average them out, you get inflation lower, but the cost is massive. Yeah.
So you basically pull demand back down to meet available supply.
Yeah, that's right. You cause a recession.
Yep.
And you jack up unemployment and all the misery that goes with that. So, I've had arguments, or not really arguments, just exchanges with people on MacroBusiness, etc., about this, and they think I'm a loon, and we disagree and that sort of stuff because you've got to smash inflation, and and I hear arguments like, inflation's horrible, especially for those in the lowest incomes, and I'm like, again, how is jacking up rates going to solve their petrol problem? How's it going to do this? And for those who are on welfare, their payments are adjusted by the inflation rate. Whereas job seeker, which is crap, like pathetically low, or the age pension, they at least get adjusted automatically for CPI. But everyone else, sure, we had the minimum wage decision last week for the very lowest 1.5% of the workforce. It's going to get an inflation adjustment. Yep. But bet your bottom dollar, almost every other industry is not going to.
Yeah.
So I don't see why smashing them with, much like ridiculously high mortgage rates is going to help the situation, especially if it's going to create a consumption spending and probably drive us into a deep recession that I honestly don't think we need to have.
And that's, of course, the point, because there's a debate in the US at the moment about the recession over there, and the markets are now saying 30% probability of recession in the next 12 months and a 78% probability of recession in the next 2 years in the US.
Yeah, and interestingly, the Fed governor's been, he seems to be blaming excessive wages from workers.
Yes,
bit like the business lobby's trying to do here. It's absurd. Wages aren't growing by the inflation rate, so how are they driving the inflation? It's just crazy, and yet you got it's the same. We're having the same argument here. You got Innes Willox from the chair of the Migration Council, wink wink, and the Australian Industry Group CEO has been incredibly vocal, trying to say that the minimum wage decision and we can't have wages go up because it's going to drive inflation, as wage price spiral. And I just look at it and go, mate, the profit share of national income has never been higher. We've got companies making record profits. The labour share of national income has never been lower. We've had this, as I said earlier, we've had the real unit labour costs has fallen 6% over the pandemic, which means businesses are paying 6% less for their workers, effectively.
Yep.
Cheap as chips. And yet you want to try and blame, the unions, etc., wanting to get an inflation-adjusted wage rise, which is what they should get anyway when productivity is positive.
Yep.
And you're trying to say that that's going to, wreck the economy. It's that, mate, if you're worried about inflation, get all your members together, make them look in the mirror and say, why are you guys jacking up prices? Just last month we saw Telstra raise all their mobile plans, etc., by the inflation rate. Why? No, there was no national outcry about it. It's like, why the hell is Telstra jacking up their mobile phone plans and all their, their phone plans and all that other stuff automatically by the inflation rate, when a tech company is not impacted by these, by fuel prices and all that sort of stuff? They're doing it just because they can.
Yep. And
there is no pushback when companies do this stuff. It's expected that companies protect their profit margins by inflation. That's why they're making record profits. But if a worker wants to protect their profit margin by getting an inflation-adjusted wage rise when their productivity's gone up, it's not allowed. It's absolutely absurd.
And the other thing to add there is if you look at the tax take from corporates relative to households, right? That has not followed that disparate income that you spoke about a second ago, right? The tax take.
Of course not, especially because the whole energy thing we're talking about.
Yeah.
They're not paying the tax. They take the profit and they use their shell companies and whatever, and they do their profit shifting and transfer pricing, etc. And they dodge their tax. I'm not saying all companies do it, but on the aggregate, that's what happens. And there's this whole, and this is a debate that's happening all around the world. It's happening in the US too. The Jacobin Mag had an article about it the other day. It's like, don't blame workers for this inflation. I mean, obviously, it's most of it's imported, but if you want to look at the domestic side, domestically driven inflation, it's not workers. It's companies. It's market power. Rod Sims came out today and actually made that point himself. He said that we've got a concentrated market here with, monopoly buying power and monopoly. So monopoly on the wage side, and obviously monopoly or oligopoly and market power on the pricing side. And they're jacking up prices, and that's one of the bigger contributor to inflation. So we've actually got a profit price inflation, not a wage price inflation.
Yep, absolutely.
Yet the focus in the AFR and all these, these other business shell, mainstream media is, the minimum wage decision was a bloody disgrace. Oh, how terrible. We give the lowest paid workers in Australia $1 extra an hour. Come on.
And of course, all the research shows that if you give people at the bottom of the income curve a little bit more, they immediately go spend it.
Of course.
Right.
So, and this is the whole thing. I mean, unfortunately, businesses can't see the forest from the trees on this one. Like because I guess they're looking at their own wage bill. They're not looking at, oh, hang on. If we pay our workers more, they spend more in the same economy, and we're more likely to get it back on the other end. But they don't look at it that way. So, look, the whole wage issue is, I guess, it's something I've become sort of passionate about it in the last, especially this last few months. I've just been watching this debate, just shaking my head going, I can't believe this is such a farce. And luckily we do have a lot of commentators calling out the BS. Unfortunately, it's just not at the AFR or at the Australian. You get, Greg Jarrick at the Garden's done a good job. I've done a good job on it. You got some other people, the Australia Institute's done a good job. The ABC's done a good job actually on some, although the ABC often just parrots whatever the business lobby says. But, there have been some people who have been calling this BS out. And, it really needs to be called out. And actually, Rod Sims, the former head of the ACCC until recently, has called it out as well. I mean, it's self-evident. You just look at the national accounts data and you see profit companies making out like bandits, record profits, highest share of, taking the biggest slice of the income pie on record. And workers are doing the opposite, yet workers are getting blamed for how dare they demand their wages go up by close to the inflation rate. How dare them, Crazy. Sorry, I'm ranting a bit today.
No.
It's basically Leith soapbox edition, this one.
No, it's good. It's good. The audience like it, and they like the truth bombs you're dropping. So keep dropping them. Now,
I just get really,
it's good.
It just fires me up, this sort of stuff.
No, it's good. One of the reasons why I like these live shows is we get a bit more sort of, spice in the conversation because people are talking more freely than they do if it's a sort of pre-recorded thing. And I think
also it's like fourth time been on the show, so obviously it's just you kind of know how to roll it.
Exactly. And look, the fact is that we need to be speaking some of this truth, right? Because it's clear that there's a lot that's broken at the moment, right? And we might have a new government in it. It might have a slightly different flavour to it, but it's 98% the same as the previous one, right?
It's Pepsi. The other one was Coke, it was Pepsi, or it's like, it's both going to rot your teeth and give you diabetes. But it's like it's the same. Like honestly, it's amazing. I've got no doubt this government's going to do. They'll do a National Integrity Commission or anti-corruption commission. They'll probably do some other stuff that's good. Might get a little bit. Cheers, Tropic. I'm glad you're enjoying the show. So you'll get a few changes here on like anti-corruption commission and whatever, and that's great. And then this whole net zero thing, whatever, great. But on these on this issue, that's probably the biggest issue we've got right in front of us right now is this energy problem.
Yep.
So I'm not talking about petrol. I'm talking, we can't do much about that. But the whole gas crisis is what's slapping us right in the face right now, and it is fixable. It's very fixable. It's not even hard. Like, you do export controls. So effectively, super profits tax for exports, and then you can funnel the money back in to subsidies, whatever, and you help pay for the debt. But you also do domestic gas reservation. It's not rocket science. Again, you look at what WA is doing, you just copy it. It's simple. And then, but all the rhetoric that's come out of the Albanese government so far has been exactly like it might as well be the coalition. It's the same. Like they're just blaming the previous government for. It was actually the Rudd-Gillard government who stuffed up originally. Correct. So they screwed up originally with the when they built the export trains by not doing the gas reservation. Then of course they were under pressure from the coalition. The coalition didn't want them either, so they both stuffed up. And then obviously the last government we had didn't do anything about it. And now we've got this government, which finally they've now got the keys. They got the keys to the Ferrari, and it's in their control. And then all the rhetoric coming out of Bowen and coming out of Mad King is protecting the gas cartel. And so, it's infuriating because it's just such an easy fix. And yes, the electoral math is so simple. 20 million voters on this side who determine whether or not you get elected, who will reward you for solving the energy problem and delivering us, energy prices that decoupled from the global prices. So we have, safe, secure, and reliable and cheapish energy, or you side with a couple of multinational gas cartels and let them just bend us over and extort us. There's your two choices. Look after the people who put you in office and who you represent, who actually cast ballots, or billionaire cartels over here. The choice should be pretty damn simple. You go for this one where the voters are, because they're the ones who will reward you and keep you in government. Yet they're going for the billionaire cartels. So it's just, it's ridiculous. And sure, they can get away with it right now because they're the new government. They've got a fresh coat of paint. They can keep blaming the old mob. That's not going to last long. Like if you fast forward 6 months and everyone's electricity prices have, doubled, whatever, gone up 50%, and then gas has doubled, and that goodwill is not going to last. And people are going to end up, revolting against you, and you could lose government next year. It'd be pretty hard to imagine losing government to Dutton. But if you go down this road and you have 3 years of this and you have a deep recession, you have a cost of living problem, you have house prices tanking, which is obviously more RBA is doing, but it all feeds in.
Yep.
You can easily get blamed for this stuff.
Yep.
So they should be, first and foremost, number one priority right now should be fixing the energy issue. Simple. It's not rocket science.
No. And as you said, WA, there's a model there that works, and we'll just roll it out and do it quick. And as you say, but also they would upset some of those big, powerful corporates, right?
Well, you know what? I reckon if they upset them, it'd probably ingratiate them with the voters, because honestly, if you play your cards right, people go, good on them. They're sticking up for the little man. They're sticking it right up the big end of town. Sure, you'll get the shills at the AFR whinging, and the rearview mirror at the AFR will be singing the Mining Council's hymn book like they always do. But outside the usual suspects, you'll get rewarded, and when people see it in their bills, they'll reward you. Like if you can actually bring down their energy costs, they'll be like, "Oh, good on you, Albo." But if you double it, they're going to say, "What the F?" Especially when we are an energy superpower. It's moronic. I use, as I said before, can you imagine filling up your car in Saudi Arabia and you're paying European prices? It is just ridiculous. You're the world's biggest supplier of petrol, and yet you'd be paying European prices. It's not right. Well, that's kind of what we're doing with gas. It doesn't make any sense.
So let's just move the conversation on slightly, because of course there is this $1 trillion of debt sitting on the balance sheet, right? And there's a budget coming up in September or October, right? So the question is, how are they going to raise more? Are they going to actually change the GST, or are they going to, just muddle along the way we've been muddling along and just accept the structural deficit? And is that important?
Look, obviously you don't want to feed inflation. So I mean, look, I honestly don't care about I'll be honest, after the pandemic, and my views changed over the past, I don't know, 5 years, I guess. I don't sort of worry about the government's structural deficit, etc. Although what I will say is, though, you don't want to be obviously feeding demand and pumping inflation and working at cross purposes with the RBA. So it's pretty stupid if you've got the RBA tightening on this side, trying to bring down demand. Rightly or wrongly, but then you got the federal government doing the opposite on that side. Like that's just contradictory policy. So they should be working in unison. So for me, that's the bigger issue. And you basically don't want to. Sorry, I'm just reading this comment. Absolutely. Look, the whole solar thing is definitely a longer term play. But problem is, we've got a crisis right here and now, and we need to sort out We can look at renewables down the track, but that's not going to save us in the next 6 months or next 2 years. So I think they need to do some decisive action on gas, as the first order issue. But yeah, sorry. Back to your question. I've got to stop reading these comments. It just it's quite it is interesting, but throws my train of thought off. So you obviously don't want the budget just pulling in opposite direction to the RBA. And starting to, obviously pumping demand when the RBA is doing the opposite. So you want them to steer in the same direction. And obviously during the pandemic, where the government launched their big stimulus, which was, in retrospection, was probably too big because obviously it
was insurance.
But
according to Phil Lowe.
Well, I mean, part of me was, look, at the time it was looking nasty. I can't blame them for the initial stimulus. I think it was, it was obviously poorly targeted, and there should have been pullback mechanisms, etc., for business on the, JobKeeper and the cash flow boost and all that sort of stuff. They didn't do any of that, which is pathetic. But the bigger problem there was they just went too long with it, and they dragged on for like 6 months, and then another, they kept extending it, and etc. But we obviously don't have those circumstances obviously finished now, so we shouldn't keep doing that. Yep. But you never know. You never know if the RBA goes too hard. We then might need the government to come in and stimulate. But that's that'll be a job for next year, the next budget. Yes. After that. Yeah, and hopefully you won't need it. But
because it's interesting, the UK, of course, they've already started putting taxes up, and they're right in the face of 11% inflation.
Yeah, well, I mean that's Well, I mean, I guess that's pulling in the same direction as the Bank of England. So, it sort of makes sense in that respect. I mean, look, certainly Labor, the stuff Labor should do, and that's unwind the stage 3 tax cuts for starters. But they've just wetted them. They've painted themselves into a corner by taking it to the election, and they want to be such a small target that they basically, and obviously they should be cutting back on superannuation concession rorts, all that kind of stuff. Is all it's kind of low hanging fruit stuff they should be doing. But unfortunately, they went to the election promising not to touch any of this stuff, so they're going to just keep the rorts going. And those are the sorts of things they should be doing, like cutting back on the super tax rorts, scrapping the stage 3 tax cuts, etc. But I can't see them doing it because they promised they won't. So, yeah, here we are. Good old Australia.
Exactly. Now, let's move on the conversation then, because, of course, New South Wales announced today as part of their budget that they're going to actually introduce the land tax option for first-time buyers up to a certain level, and effectively relatively low, although I immediately think, well, yeah, but you can put the rate up later, right? So have you got a particular perspective on land tax versus stamp duty? Does it make much difference?
Yeah, definitely. Look, I'm fairly in the camp of get rid of stamp duty and transfer to a broad-based land tax. For a whole bunch of reasons. Like if you want to look at the nerdy modelling of the marginal excess burden, so that's basically like the distortions from that come from tax, like the cost of the economy, blah blah blah. Stamp duty is like one of the very worst tax. Land tax is one of the best taxes because you can't avoid it. It also gets levied on foreign ownership. So if you've got a foreigner who owns land in Australia, although they don't live here, they still pay tax on it, which is really good. But also just from the micro level, like I've always thought it was kind of ridiculous that those who have to move house for whatever reason, whether you want to downsize, you want to upsize, you want to move into a house that's a bigger house because you've got a growing family, you got to move for a job, etc. I think I've always thought it was ridiculous that they get taxed 5%, or in the case of Victoria, it's like 6%. Just for the privilege of moving house, and it'd make more sense just to do a broad-based land tax, so you don't get charged those transaction costs. So because under the whole stamp duty model, someone like my mum, who's lived in the same house since 1972, basically gets to free ride off other people who have to move or had to move more regularly. So if someone's had to move houses 4 times and has had to buy, sell, they've paid way more tax than someone who just moved once or bought their one house in 1972 and never moved. And especially back given 1972, she would have paid like 25 cents for a stamp duty and about 50 cents for a house. So those people have basically been, cross-subsidised because they're staying still. And I'm one of those people. Like I've been in this house since I've had 2 houses. So a small house, had to upsize. So I've been stung twice with stamp duty. But this house I'm in now, I'm probably going to be in for the next, 30 years, unless I can convince my wife to move to Queensland eventually. Fingers crossed. So I'm going to be a free rider as well. And in fact, stamp duty suits me because I get to free ride and everyone else. Like I paid my stamp duty, in 2013, and I could potentially go the next 30 years without having to pay any more. And while other people are paying it for me, but it doesn't really make sense levying 5% of the people, 5% of the houses that transact every year to pay tax for the other 95%. It'd make more sense if everyone who owns a house pays a little bit. It's just more efficient. I'm firmly in the camp of transition from stamp duty to land tax. Problem is, it costs the state governments a hell of a lot of money during that transition. So they give up a whole bunch of money. So if they work it out so that like the average land tax bill's like 1/15 of what, if they assume that people are going to move every 15 years, 1/15 of what they pay in stamp duty, you're basically you're getting a little bit every year, and it takes years before you catch up. And there's obviously an interest rate cost to that. So in order to get these policies through, you have to basically have the federal government incentivize the states to do it and effectively share the costs, because getting rid of stamp duty for land tax is modelled to increase productivity quite significantly and also GDP. But the benefits of that go to the federal government through through corporate tax collection and personal income tax collection. So you've got this classic Australian vertical fiscal imbalance where the state governments do the reform, right? They bear the cost, at least initially, and the federal government gets the benefit through the rising productivity and higher GDP. So a fair situation would be the feds give some of that benefit back to the states. And that way you'll actually get reform. And that's how you reform these state taxes. But unfortunately, Jim Chalmers, our new Treasurer-in-Chief, talked big about productivity in the election and then pretty much swatted the idea of, a couple of days ago he came out and said, sorry, we're not going to give New South Wales money to transition to from stamp duty land tax. So it's just, might as well be the Morrison government in there. It's the same, it's Pepsi, we had Coke, got Pepsi. Yep. Basically tastes the same, same shot, different shovel, basically. So,
and the point there with the land tax is, of course, as you say, it sort of sticks. So once it's stuck to a property, it's permanently stuck to the property, and that means that it's a one-time choice, right? Except, of course, our history shows that people tend to put taxes up more later, right? So effectively, it might be a relatively small amount now, but in 5 years' time or 10 years' time, there's nothing to stop them putting it way higher.
Yeah, well, that happens anyway with stamp duty, because stamp duty's
linked to the price.
That's it, yeah. So it's linked to the price, and it's also progressive as well. So, and in the case of Victoria, our I won't slam Dan Andrews. I won't slander him too bad, but our great leader, in his wisdom, put up stamp duty last year's budget. So he actually, So instead of reducing the state's reliance on stamp duty, so Victoria is already the most reliant on stamp duty in the nation because we're the highest stamp duty rate. He then put it up even further. So if you buy a house that's worth $2 million or more, you basically pay an extra 1% stamp duty. So it's like 6.5% now. It's insane. While we've got, Ponzi Dom Perrottet's trying to do the right thing on it, you got Dan Andrews doing the opposite. So that's Australia for you.
Yeah, well, I'm not convinced, I have to say, that land tax is particularly better, because I'm just rather sceptical of the way that governments operate, right?
I'll be honest with you. This is where you got the devil on my shoulder is like real Leith, who's actually, and then you got the economic purist or whatever, like the analytical Leith. Yeah. Real Leith is like, I don't want to see this get through because I'm going to have to start paying more tax. Because as I said, I paid my stamp duty in 2013, and I am moving for years, so I can free ride. So there's that self-interest side on this shoulder, but then the other shoulder is like looking at it going, it is moronic to be charging the 5% of people that change homes every year this enormous amount of tax in order to fund the services that the other 95% also use. Like, I just think that in principle, that's wrong.
Yep.
And then also giving people basically an opt-out and not paying it by just not moving, and distorting the housing market so that you have this situation where, and my neighbours went through this, they were like, well, we've got this tiny little block. They live in a subdivided house. The kids were growing up, needed more room. They really should have moved, and they wanted to move, but they're like, well, what's the point? I'm just going to have to, pay agents' fees and then this ginormous stamp duty bill because I want to live in the same area, when I can just go and, add on a second story and go through all this crap. And it's not the ideal situation they went through. They would have preferred to have moved, but because the stamp duty hit was so huge, it's like, well, I can spend $400,000 renovating this house. It's still not going to be really what we want, and avoid $100,000 plus in stamp duty because we live in a nice area. And basically get 25% of my construction costs paid for, or I can move and pay this $100,000 stamp duty and all the other stuff. So they basically, so it causes those distortions too. And then, or you have a situation like my mum who lives in by herself in a big house. And one of the reasons, believe it or not, she doesn't want to move is because she goes, the stamp duty.
Yep.
I'm like, Mum, really? But that's the way people think.
Yeah, I know. Well, it can be a big number.
Yeah. Well, it's a big number. It's like, why would I pay that when I can just stay here?
Yeah.
And again, she moved. She's lived in the house since 1972. She avoided paying tax that whole time because she just stayed still.
Yeah. I just want to move the conversation on again. Cookie Boy was just asking, have you seen any price drops in Melbourne? Cookie Boy has been doing a bit of work on property price moves, and there's a bit of a slide in various areas across the Melbourne area at the moment.
So you want to get we had on 2 weeks ago on Nucleus Wealth's podcast, we had Catherine Cashmore, who's a buyer's agent.
Yeah, she's been on my channel a few times.
Yeah. So Catherine and I are friends, and we we talk once a week or something. I give her talk to her, chat about stuff, and I always ask for. She's always my on the ground person, where I get the the updates and etc. Look. I personally haven't noticed any. I follow the CoreLogic index, and that's obviously showing that Melbourne's rolling over. It's down about 1.5% from peak, just starting. But there has been some signs like auctions passing in. There was one in Northcote cited in the press the other day. No bidders. Would have been gone gangbusters 6 months ago. There's all those sort of reports, but I personally haven't seen any. But I don't go to auctions in Melbourne. I'll be honest. I'm not, as I said, I've lived here since 2013. Yes. I'm not moving. I've got no interest. Like the only time I ever go to an auction is if there's an auction in my street or the next street. And it's a good way just to see the neighbours and you talk smack, that sort of thing. But according to Catherine, it's it's starting, but it's also depends on the region. Like there's some areas which are still going for good prices, etc. But we are only at the start. We're only 7 weeks in.
Yeah, it's quite quick. But
it's very quick.
It's interesting because Cookie Boy posted a few examples, particularly in some of the regional areas where there are significant falls. I'm probably going to do a show on this in the next 2 or 3 days. It does seem to me that there are some wobbles in some of those.
Mate, Brisbane as well.
And Brisbane as well. Yeah.
So I've been tracking Brisbane. Obviously part of the job, I track the CoreLogic index, and I've just been watching Brisbane for years. And about probably a month ago, probably only 3 weeks ago, really, Brisbane really started to turn. And now the CoreLogic index is pretty much, it'll show it goes up one day and then falls the next. And if you look at it over, I think, the last couple of weeks, it's basically had no growth or it's down a little bit. And so Brisbane's starting to roll as well. So you had Sydney first, Melbourne second, Brisbane's just starting to turn. Adelaide's still going up. Perth's like not doing a whole lot, but it's definitely turning, and it's been led by Sydney. Sydney was fell over first, followed by Melbourne, and now Brisbane's starting to roll, and it's just a matter of time.
Yep.
Obviously, the RBA ramming up interest rates is going to sink all boats, but Sydney and Melbourne worst.
And the confidence thing we touched on earlier on, right? And just sort of taking that slightly further, this is the inflation expectations, right? I think that probably explains quite a lot of why people are a bit twitchy, because actually...
100%. And you can see on that chart, so see the first spike, that was in April. So that was just before the federal government cut the fuel excise in half.
Yeah.
And you can see, so it spiked and then it fell when they cut the fuel excise. So that whacked 22 cents a litre off petrol.
Yep.
And then now petrol prices has gone up and it's almost back to where it was before they cut the fuel excise. And as a result, the inflation expectations, almost back up to its highest level. And that's with the 20 cent, 22, I think, 22 cent. Yeah, 22 cent fuel litre. And that's ending.
That's ending in September, right?
Yep. And the Labor government's already said they're not going to extend it. So if that comes through, that's going to be another whack to inflation as well. And also, obviously, our hip pocket, because, petrol go from $2 a litre to automatically go $2 to $2.20. So 10% rise on where it is now.
Yep.
What are the prices in Sydney? Are they about $2?
I'm paying well above $2 now. Yeah.
Yeah, because you live in regional, eh? So.
Yeah. Down in Wollongong. There's one of the two garages is sort of closed at the moment in the local area here. Conveniently, I'm not sure whether that's just because they're doing renovations or whether they've decided just to shut up shop. But it is interesting. So the prices are pretty high here, and of course people travel larger distances in the regionals, which is creating. I see that in my surveys, a lot of people call out three things as the main problem: the fuel, and then electricity. The other one is, interestingly, some of the healthcare costs and some of the childcare costs. Childcare costs have actually really hit very hard.
Oh, okay, yeah. See, I'm past that stage. I got a 14-year-old and 12-year-old. So, it's a long time. But the health, I did have had to go and get the neck surgery earlier this year. Got a disc replaced. That's a scar there. So I had my first taste of the health system in years. And it is expensive when you have to get things done, even though Australia's very good.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, it is very interesting just seeing, and like I say, the point, and I keep making this point, people have a single pot of money, right? And out of that pot of money, they try and sort of, put it into the various things. Yep. One of the things I'm also seeing is the giving up on Netflix subscriptions and some of those other
absolutely.
That's already happening.
Yeah, and gym memberships. Gym memberships is another one.
Correct.
I know I've spoken to a few gym owners, and just because that's sort of, circles I move in, I spend a lot of time at the gym. So, and they're doing it real tough, because that's one of those things where during the pandemic, people learned to not go to the gym. They got used to it. A bit like work from home. Yeah. You get used to not going to the office. And then once it's finished, you're like, well, why am I doing that? So gyms have had that problem where people got used to exercise on their own. But then at the same time, it's also one of those discretionary things. It's very easy to cut. One of the first things you cut. And as you said, you got this bucket where you got your things you have to buy. So you got your essentials, and you got no choice. You got to buy that no matter what. You got to pay your mortgage no matter what. You got to pay your rent no matter what. And if those things go up, well, obviously you got less money for everything else, and it's your discretionaries that are going to get whacked.
Yeah, and the non-discretionary inflation 6.6.
Well, there you go. So that means the discretionaries are going to get smashed.
Yep.
So it's kind of this unstimulus thing I was saying before. Like during the pandemic, we obviously had not just record low interest rates, etc., but we had huge amounts of government stimulus going into shoring up household budgets, but also not that in Melbourne we drove that much because we couldn't go more than 5Ks because we had a psycho in charge. Yep. But petrol prices then were $1. So even if you did drive, you got it. It was really cheap. It was just like I remember filling up the car for $1. I'm like, man, this is like Back to the Future. Yeah. I might as well get in a DeLorean and go back 10 years. That's what it felt like. But now, so you actually had so the cost of things were going down as well, and you had disinflation in a lot of areas. Yeah. But now it's got the opposite. So obviously the stimulus has run out, and interest rates are going up. Rents have soared. Yeah. So I feel sorry for the poor sods who are renting.
Yeah,
and it's another one of those things you can't negotiate.
Yeah, this is the latest listings from CoreLogic, right, which shows that the
that was good.
Total listings are down, and obviously when listings go down, the price of accommodation goes up. And I'm actually seeing now a massive jump in rental stress. I measure that separately from mortgage stress, right?
The interesting thing about the chart, that's actually only capital cities as well. So
regional areas even worse.
Yeah. So regional's even worse. So in the last year, according to CoreLogic, capital city rents went up about 8.2%, I think it was. And regions went up about 10%.
Correct.
So the regions are copied even harder.
Yep.
So, the rental listings there are down to about 2014 levels. And Australia's population is about 10% larger than it was in 2014. Yep. So, it's an incredibly tight rental market.
And without much migration.
Yeah.
Although, is that going to change?
Yeah, well, that's the other. So this is the conundrum. When I think I talked about this last time. When the pandemic hit, I automatically thought, this is going to smash the rental market because the immigration stopped. But it's one of those things. It's that other things equal type proposition you have in your head. Well, other things weren't equal, and as it turned out, the RBA data showed that we had a huge reduction in rental in group houses. So people moved out of group houses because they needed space. You need an extra room for your home office because you're working from home, blah, blah, blah. So, and then people who are rich, obviously, some of them bought second homes as well. So, their weekend pad. And as a result, so basically although we didn't have all these people coming in, we had more rental demand, which is what sent the vacancy rate down and sent rent surging. So now we've got the proposition of, we've got the lowest rental vacancy rate on record. We've got rents growing double-digit rates pretty much. And just as the migration tap's been turned on. So that's just going to add more pain. And, I think renters are I always talk about homeowners and mortgages and that sort of thing, just because that's where the leverage is. But it's actually the renters who are copping it the hardest.
Yep.
I missed that comment. It was something on rents and immigration. But, I think it's just going to get worse, unfortunately. Yes, absolutely. I think rental stress is going to spike. I'm not the only one who thinks that. Louis Christopher at SQM Research wrote that up last week.
Yep.
When he released his data, he said that it's just going to get worse. I think Cameron Cusher from PropTrack said the same. So it's just logic. I mean, unless you have a reversal in that people going back into group houses and you have a sort of reversal of the pandemic trend, which saw, rental demand go up despite population staying flat, unless those factors reverse, and I can't see why they would.
Yep.
Work from home's here to stay, etc. It's just going to add more fuel to the rental fire, unfortunately.
Well, I'm looking forward to the latest census data, which is coming out very soon now, right? End of this month. I love that. Right? Like it is a nerd's dream. So unfortunately, it's only every 5 years. Like it takes a lot of work up. But I've already got the spreadsheets from the last two censuses. So I'm just going to add to the last two. Yep. I know exactly where to go. And nerd's dream. Like it'll take me a while to go through it, but like on housing, on home ownership rates and rental stress and mortgage stress. I should be really interested to see what the household multiple is. Yeah, that's right. It's going to be awesome. A really interesting one.
Yeah, and it'd be interesting to see also. I actually think the home ownership rate's probably going to go up, which is, I mean, it's a blip, but long-term trend's still down. But I think this census they might actually go up just because of all the spike in first home buyer mortgages last year and the year before. So I wouldn't be surprised if the home ownership rate actually goes up. It's not really a good news story. It's just it's a short-term thing, but we'll see.
And it'll take me a few weeks to sort of swallow all the data and try and pull the stuff out. But
it's a lot of work.
It is a lot of work, and it's not necessarily the most user-friendly data extraction processes, right?
I'm sort of hoping it's I'm hoping it's better. Like I
hope so.
I'm gonna have to totally refresh myself. Actually, might go and have a look tomorrow at last year's to make sure, because otherwise it's just, you got to relearn. It's 5 years.
It's a nightmare because you don't use it frequently enough to use it, but it is pretty good. Well, we're getting close to the end of the.
Oh wow, it's gone quick.
It's gone pretty quick.
Sorry, guys, I've been babbling tonight. So,
no, but I guess
that's really quick.
Yeah, sort of couple of questions. Any sense on the Aussie dollar? I mean, it's sitting at 69 something at the minute, right? And it's obviously very much impacted by local but also international things and the strength of the US dollar. I guess my perspective is the US dollar is going to probably remain strong, so the Aussie dollar is probably going to be under pressure.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, it's one of the it's probably a mug's game trying to forecast it. So on the one hand, you got obviously commodity prices are strong, so that usually helps the currency. You've also got the RBA raising rates aggressively, but every area is. But the interest rate differentials probably going to, I don't know, is it going to close or is it going to widen? I don't know, because the Fed's been aggressive as well.
Yeah, well, the Fed's been super aggressive.
Yeah, but if the RBA is super aggressive, that'll help the currency on this end. So honestly, mate, it's when it comes to that stuff, I'm like, I don't even try. It is.
A few people were asking that, so I thought I'd just bowl you the short ball.
Look, I'm sure Dave Lyon-Smith could give you a better answer, but the hot tip.
Yeah.
Anyone who says they can tip the currencies probably, they're guessing but trying to sound confident.
So what's going to be the most important bit of information that you'll be watching for over the next month or two?
Obviously, mortgage rates for sure. Sorry, interest rates, mortgage rates. All the housing stuff. CoreLogic Index, how it's rolling over, all that sort of stuff.
Yeah.
But that's not really macroeconomy stuff. Probably the problem with it is next month we're not going to get obviously mortgage data. Yep. So we get that early next month. We'll have the housing finance. I'm
expecting that to sort of continue to slide down a bit.
Yeah, well, I think it should be May. I think it should be the first one that we get that's going to capture the rate rise.
Yep.
So unfortunately, a lot of this data is so lagged.
Yes.
That I think the last housing finance one was April. I'm pretty sure. It's usually a couple. Yeah, that sounds about right. About April. So. We're not really we haven't even started capturing the interest rate rises yet, apart from the fixed end.
Yeah.
So it's going to take a few more months to even see the impact of that. Unfortunately, we're not going to get any wage price data for a bit.
Yep.
For this couple of months. So I'm looking forward to that when it does come out.
Yep.
That's a couple of months away, and then we're 2.5 months away from the next national accounts. So.
Yeah. And because the inflation data is only quarterly.
Yeah, that's it. Which is ridiculous.
Ridiculous, isn't it?
Especially this time.
Yeah.
Come on, guys. Out of all the surveys the ABS can do, that is one you should probably do monthly. I mean, you can do labour force monthly. Yeah. Why can't you do inflation?
Yeah.
And especially given, if you look at some of the surveys that the ABS puts out, some of it's pretty. Let's be honest. A lot of it's BS.
Yes.
A lot of their smalls, I don't even look at them. I look at this, go, what is this crap? I'll go to their release calendar and it's got a lot of great stuff, but there's still stuff on there and you're like, dude, why are you even reporting this?
Yeah.
It's just not even worth reporting. I mean, maybe someone finds it interesting somewhere and good luck to them. But, if you can choose that weirdos, that fringe survey, which 5 people look at versus doing a monthly inflation one. Wouldn't you do the inflation one?
Well, it's so,
especially in times
it's so
like
critical now.
Yeah, that's it. It's not always critical. Obviously, pre-pandemic when inflation was just low every quarter, who cares? Because it's not really rate of change stuff. But right now, when you got the RBA deliberating over doing massive, big decisions on interest rates, you kind of want that stuff monthly. And it'd be good if they could have some sort of wage, even if it's not as detailed as the quarterly one, like just some sort of wage measure would be handy.
Yeah.
Handy to have monthly, but, especially just CPI. I mean, come on, guys. Other countries do it monthly. We have unofficial ones like the Melbourne Institute, whatever. But, we want the ABS to do it.
Yeah,
and
David says, I'm pretty sure I read some of the ABS is moving over to monthly inflation. I haven't seen anything about it. If that's
neither
true.
have I hope.
Yeah. It should absolutely should.
Like 30 years too late, but good on them.
Yeah.
I mean, look, the labour force used to be quarterly back in the 70s.
Yeah,
I know because I was trying to find out when the unemployment rate was as low as it is now, and I could probably go back to the physical copies and that, but I couldn't actually find it. But I know it is the lowest since the mid 70s because that's what the ABS said.
Yep.
But it used to be quarterly back then. So, we could go to monthlies back then for labour force. Why couldn't they do it for inflation? It's just crazy.
Yep. Even if it's a proxy measure. So in the UK, the equivalent of the ABS in the UK has started just pulling out sort of critical prices of websites to create a proxy, right? To give a bit of a flavour.
Just to track. You're right. The ONS does that. That's right. So it could be,
you could do something.
The quarterly CPI is about, I don't know, 14, 15 sheets of stuff.
Yeah.
I think it's about that many. Like it's heaps.
Yeah.
You could just do a summary one, like do the base one.
Yeah.
So the summary spreadsheet that just gives you the headline stuff.
Yeah.
And maybe like a trimmed mean and weighted median, so the underline, like just something which does
some indicator.
Headline, trim mean, weighted median.
Yep.
That's all you need. Just 3 figures even would be good. Like 3 indexes on that, and that'd suffice. And then you do your detailed quarterly, and that'd be enough. But for some reason, we're just this archaic quarterly release.
And the reason I wanted to make that point was the RBA is making decisions based on information that's somewhere between 3 and 6 months old.
Yeah, absolutely. Which is like that. Well, to be honest with you, the person who gives me the best insight on most stuff now is actually Gareth Aird at CBA.
Yeah.
Because A, he's a good dude. B, he's very smart, and C, he's a genius in that he took over as like the head of Australian economics there, and one of the first things he did was he's got basically a quarter of the nation's data, right? Yes. Because a quarter of the nation banks with the CBA.
Yep.
And he goes, we've got all this like macro data. It's not taking people's individual details, and he's made his own basically shadow ABS trackers on everything based on a sample size that's better than what the ABS has got.
Yep.
And he's tested against the ABS findings and whatever. And so he's actually got more of a real time idea what's going on than anyone else.
Yep.
And here's me, especially during the pandemic in 2020, you're looking at stuff. The economy had already turned up, but then your data's saying it's still crap because you're looking at because it's so old and out of date. And we've got that situation, now, and it's one of the problems we've always got. Like the data when it comes out is, national accounts is already 3 months behind. Inflation's a couple months behind. You only get them quarterly. The labour market's a bit better because it's monthly, but even then, the labour market survey that we got last week for March only went to March 15th.
Correct.
So it didn't really capture the rate rise anyway, because the rate rise happened, like it doesn't. So, we're dealing with lags everywhere, but it's particularly egregious with this quarterly stuff. So, often we're steering blind, but someone like Gareth Aird, he's got real-time data in front of him.
Well, I've really enjoyed speaking with you again this evening. Thank you very much. Thanks for answering some of the questions. There's a whole bunch we didn't get to in the chat, but nevertheless, I think it was a very fruitful conversation. I guess the net conversation is where we're guiding backwards through data that's out of date. The RBA is a bit off the pace. Chances are they're going to put rates up probably higher than they should, and then we'll have to take them down again, and it's going to be a bumpy ride.
It's going to be fun to watch, though.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, exactly right.
I'll be honest. This is the most fun time I've had. So I've been doing this for 10 years now.
Yes.
So we started like 10 years full time doing macro, and this is probably the most interesting right now in terms of where the economy's at and what's going on. And there's stuff going on every day. Like I can write about whatever. It's easy, whereas last year was just like pulling teeth.
Yeah.
So it's an incredibly interesting time to be doing this.
People are telling me off because I'm sounding quite excited and enthusiastic about what's going on, right? That's simply because there's so much to look at, right? And so, every day is new and there's a lot of stuff, whereas last year it was, what am I going to say today? So it is very, very interesting, right?
Mate, like last year was pulling teeth. And that's the thing. It's not, you're not excited because you want a catastrophe.
No, absolutely
It's just because there's
stuff going on. Exactly.
Yeah,
it's what we do.
I mean, you don't want to turn up to your job and just, have nothing to just be twiddling your thumbs and this is boring.
Yeah.
But it is actually kind of exciting. And I don't know how it's going to play out. That's the thing. I can pretend that I know this, and say, this is definitely going to happen. But I'll tell you what, nothing's definite. And I got no idea about how high the RBA is going to jack rates. All we can do is look at the forecast, like the financial market one, and just go, man, that's crazy. If that happens, but I don't think they will. But hey, they might. But I'm here to watch.
And I'll just share this at the end. This is the 3-year, because I can't get the 2-year up at the moment. 3.7 is the current 3-year rate.
Wow.
3.7. That's pretty much as high as it's been for a long, long time. So that gives you a bit of a flavour that the markets are still voting with their feet. And the 10-year is just slightly stronger at 4.08 at the moment. It's been higher, so still very, very strong. So there you go.
Is that a Bloomberg terminal?
No, it's investing.com.
Cool.
I've just created my own custom chart look, so that's what I use. Yeah,
I should get. I've never used that. I should get on.
I recommend it. The beauty of it is you can create your own looks and just keep your own lists, and then they pop up in exactly the way you've formatted them. So it's quite a good tool. So
that's a nice.
And it doesn't cost anything.
Yeah, no, that's always nice. The Bloomberg terminal is whoa.
I know. I looked at that some time ago. I thought, no, I'm not going to go there. So I just go. I go with the investing, and it's pretty much real time, so it works quite well.
Yeah, investing.com. All right.
Yeah. Well, I really thank you for your time, and we should just call out macrobusiness.com.au, right? That's your
that's right.
Your day job.
Macrobusiness.com.au. Also, Chief Economist at Nucleus Wealth, the MB Fund. Can everyone vote if they like caffeinated me or uncaffeinated me? So this is me loose. I haven't been drinking alcohol, but I've drunk a bit too much coffee, which I don't usually have this late. Let me know and I'll change accordingly next time. But thanks everyone for watching. Macrobusiness.com.au. Go and have a look. If you want to read some entertaining articles on property. And New Zealand property, Australian property. I do other stuff as well, policy and all that. But I'll be honest with you, I write a property article, I get 10 times the views, if not 20 times the views on that, as the most important policy article I'll ever write. That's just what people love. They love that stuff. They eat it up. Aussies love the property. So do Kiwis,
exactly right. So. Well, thank you very much. I think the caffeinated Leith worked very well, so we'll do that again next time, and you just come back in a few weeks' time, and we'll explore the world of economics once again. So thanks very much. Have a great evening.
One day I'll do it drunk as well, if you'd like me to. We'll see.
Drunk in charge of a live show. That should be fun. All right.
Yeah, no, that's all right. But thanks very much for having me, and thanks everyone for watching. Appreciate it.
See you later. Bye-bye. There you go, folks. Another very interesting conversation. Leith's always great value, isn't he? And just to explain that, next week I've got Damon coming back on to talk about the markets and investing. Given where the markets are, that's going to be an interesting conversation. So come and join us then. And in the meantime, of course, we are posting shows daily to YouTube at the moment with everything that's going on. And there's also the Interest of the People channel as well, where I speak with John Adams on various things too. And of course, before I go, we have to just go back to the doggy cams, which are I mean, that is a live feed. You wouldn't believe it. That is a live feed. That isn't just a static photograph, but they are sound asleep. So there you go. Anyway, thank you very much. Have a great evening. Have a great week. And look forward to seeing you live next week at the same time. And keep safe, keep warm. And I hope that the inflation genie doesn't get too far out the bottle for you in the meantime. This is Martin North from Digital Finance Analytics, signing off. See ya.